Welcome back to Season 2 of Midwest Covencast Presents Weekend Reads. I'm Marilyn of Midwest Covencast. Here in the second half of Season 2, we will be making our way through Book 3 of Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy or magic, which explores ceremonial magic. You can find podcast extras for this season and more at MidwestCovencast.com. I hope you enjoy this week's installment. Chapter 37. Of man's soul, and through what means it is joined to the body. The soul of man is a certain divine light, created after the image of the Word, the cause of causes, and first example, and the substance of God, figured by a seal, whose character is the eternal Word. Also, the soul of man is a certain divine substance, individual, and wholly present in every part of the body, so produced by an incorporeal author, that it depends by the power of the agent only, not by the bosom of the matter. The soul is a substantial number, uniform, conversive unto itself, and rational, very far excelling all bodies and material things, the partition of which is not according to the matter, nor proceeding from inferior and grosser things, but from the efficient cause. For it is not a quantitative number, but removed from all corporeal laws, whence it is not divided nor multiplied by parts. Therefore the soul of man is a certain divine substance, flowing from a divine fountain, carrying along with itself number, not that divine one by the which the Creator hath disposed of all things, but a rational number, by the which seeing it hath a proportion to all things, it can understand all things. Therefore man's soul, being such, according to the opinion of the Platonists, immediately proceeding from God, is joined by competent means to this grosser body, whence first of all in its descent it is involved in a celestial and aerial body, which they call the celestial vehicle of the soul, others the chariot of the soul. Through this middle thing, by the command of God, who is the center of the world, it is first infused into the middle point of the heart, which is the center of man's body, and from thence it is diffused through all the parts and members of his body, when it joins his chariot to the natural heat, being a spirit generated from the heart by heat. By this it plunges itself into the humours, by the which it inheres in all the members, and to all these is made equally the nighest, although it be diffused from one to another, even as the heat of fire adheres most nigh to the air and water, although it be transferred by the air to the water. Thus it is manifest how the immortal soul, by an immortal body, viz., an ethereal vehicle, is included in a gross and mortal body. But when by a disease or some mischief these middle things are dissolved or fail, then the soul itself, by these middle things, recollects itself, and flows back into the heart, which was the first receptacle of the soul. But the spirit of the heart failing, and heat being extinct, it leaves him, the man dies, and the soul flees away with this celestial vehicle, and the genius, his keeper, and the demon follow it, being gone forth, and carry it to the judge, where sentence being pronounced, God quietly leads forth the good souls to glory, the evil, the fierce devil, drags to punishment. Chapter 38. What divine gifts man receives from above, from the several orders of the intelligences and the heavens. By the 7 planets, as it were by instruments, all powers are diffused into man from the supreme fountain of good. By Saturn, a sublime contemplation and profound understanding, solidity of judgment, firm speculation, stability, and an immovable resolution. By Jupiter, an unshaken prudence, temperance, benignity, piety, modesty, justice, faith, grace, religion, equity, clemency, royalty. By Mars, truth, not to be terrified, constant courage and fortitude, a fervent desire of animosity, the power of acting and the practice, and an inconvertible vehemency of the mind. By the Sun, nobility of mind, perspicuity of imagination, the nature of knowledge and opinion, maturity, counsel, zeal, light of justice, reason, and judgment, distinguishing right from wrong, purging light from the darkness of ignorance, the glory of truth found out, and charity, the queen of all virtues. By Venus, a fervent love, most sweet hope, the motion of desire, order, concupiscence, beauty, sweetness, desire of increasing, and propagation of itself. By Mercury, a piercing faith and belief, clear reasoning, the vigor of interpreting and pronouncing, gravity of speech, acuteness of wit, discourse of reason, and the swift motions of the senses. By the Moon, a peace-making consonancy, fecundity, the power of generation and of growing greater, of increasing and decreasing, and a moderate temperance, and faith, which being conversant in manifest and occult things, yields direction to all. Also motion to the tilling of the earth for the manner of life and giving growth to itself and others. But these influences are principally drawn from those 7 intelligences who stand before the face of God, who dispose the soul, the seat of these virtues. But the planets dispose the body only, giving a tractable complexion proportioned and tempered for every good thing. And they are, as it were, the instruments of the intelligences. But God, as the primary cause, doth yield both the influence and increase to all. They, therefore, who have sought out the virtues and diverse dispositions of the soul, do judge that they obtain diverse natures, by reason of the diversity of means, by the which they have a passage to us, and that these souls are not joined with the bodies themselves, unless they be proportioned by these stars. So in a body brought to a temperament by Jupiter, they think that the soul infused is temperated by the power and intelligence of Jupiter, and so of the rest, according to which disposition, if the soul work well in this body. When it's purged and expiated, it returns to that divine power and mansion from whence it descended. Furthermore, from the angelical orders, man is strengthened with wonderful virtues, viz., from the angels, that he may be a messenger of the divine will and an interpreter of the mind of God. From the archangels, that he may rule over all beasts of the field, fish of the sea, and fowls of the air, over the which command is given him. From the principalities, that all things may be subdued to him, he comprehending the powers of all, and drawing all powers to himself by a certain force, most secret and supercelestial. From the virtues it receives power, by the which it constantly fighting is strengthened against the enemies of truth, for the reward of which we run a race in this life, from the powers against the enemies of this earthly tabernacle, from the dominations it hath help, by the which we can subject any domestic enemy we carry along with us, and can obtain our desired end. From the thrones we are knit together, and being collected into ourselves, we fix our memory on those eternal visions. From the cherubims is light of mind, power of wisdom, very high fantasies and figures, by the which we are able to contemplate even the divine things. From the seraphims, that by the perfect flame of love we may at length inhere in them. These are the degrees, these are the ladders, by the which men easily ascend to all kinds of powers, by a certain natural connection and chariot, according to the diverse disposition of body and mind, and by the favor of the stars, in the disposing of the body and of the intelligences ruling them, the nature of which the soul in its descent puts on, even as light the color of the glass through which it passes, the supreme power of the Creator favoring, from whom is all good, and without which no good nor perfect thing can be obtained. Therefore, all those do labor in vain, who trusting only on the course of nature, and the power and favor of inferior things, do think to attain to divine things. And those who fanning to have a foot in the heavens, do endeavor to receive those things from the favor of the heavens, which ought to be received from God alone. For these inferiors, I mean animals, herbs, stones, metals, their power subservient to the heaven, but the heaven from the intelligences, but these from God, in whom all things pre-exist in the greatest power. As in man, the little world there is not a member, which hath not correspondence with some element, plant, intelligence, and with some measure and numeration in the archetype, as we have shown before. Chapter 39. How the superior influences, seeing they are good by nature, are depraved in these inferior things, and are made causes of evil. Seeing every power and virtue is from above, from God, from the intelligences and stars, who can neither err nor do evil, it is necessary that all evil, and whatsoever is found disagreeing and dissonant in these inferior things, do proceed, not from the malice of the influence, but from the evil disposition of the receiver. Thus Chrysippus rightly sang, "They do like fools accuse the gods falsely, make them the cause of all their misery, when as their folly hurts themselves." Hence Jupiter, calling to mind the case of Aegisthus, slain by Orestes, by Homer in the council of the gods, said, "Us gods do men accuse, what vice is this? To be the cause, fountain of what's amiss, when they themselves by their own wickedness run into danger." When therefore the perversity of the subject receives the influences of the perverse, or its debility cannot endure the efficacy of the superiors, then by the influence of the heavens, thus received into a matter full of discords, doth result something dissonant, deformed, and evil. Yet the celestial powers always remain good, which while they exist in themselves, and from the giver of light, have their influence by the holy intelligences and heavens, even till they shall come to the moon. Their influence is good, as it were in the first degree. But then, when it is received in a viler subject, it also is vilified. Then also in respect of the different nature of the recipient, it is received after diverse manners, and by the qualities disagreeing in the same subject amongst themselves. It also is varied, and patiently suffers in the subject. Whence from all comprehended in the subject, at length some other thing doth result than the superiors send down. Therefore the hurtful quality in these inferiors is far different from the influx of the heavens, and therefore, as the distemper of the blear-eyed is not to be imputed to the light, nor burnings to the fire, nor wounds to the sword, nor fetters and prisons to the judge, but to the evil disposed and offenders. So neither is the fault of wicked ones to be cast on the celestial influences. Therefore, we being well disposed, and celestial influences cooperate all things for good, but being evil disposed, and having for our sins that divine good, which was in us, departed from us, all things work for evil. Therefore, the cause of all our evils is sin, which is the disorder and distemper of our soul. From the which, then, thus evilly governing, or falling down, or declining from that which the celestial influences require, all things rebel and are distempered for our destruction. Then in man's body, otherwise most temperate, and composed with most sweet harmony, the distemper of the elements begins. Evil humors arise, and even the good, being disordered and severed from one another by a certain vicissitude, both vex and torment the body. Then is a most vehement dissonance perceived, either by a superfluidity or diminution, or some intrinsically accident, or by superfluous meat, whence superfluous humors are generated, and by the same cause infirmities follow, yea, the animal spirits, the bridle being broken, do fall to contention. Then the celestial influences, otherwise of themselves good, are made hurtful to us, even as the light of the sun to eyes ill disposed. Then Saturn darts down, anguish, tediousness, melancholy, madness, sadness, obstinacy, rigidness, blasphemy, desperation, lying, apparitions, affrightments, walkings of the dead, stirrings of devils. Jupiter then sends down covetousness, evil occasions to get wealth, and tyranny, Mars furious, wrath profane, arrogance, violent boldness, fierce stubbornness, but the sun, imperious pride, and insatiable ambition, Venus, the deceit of concupiscence, lascivious loves and filthy lusts, Mercury, deceits, cozenges, lies, subtle desires of evil, propensity to sin, the moon, the inconstant progress of all things, and whatsoever is contrary to man's nature. And by this means man himself, by reason of his unlikeness with the heavenly things, receives hurt, whence he ought to reap benefit, by reason of the same dissonancy with the heavenly things, as Proclus said. Men also are subjected even to wicked spirits, who as the officers of God do discharge themselves in punishing them. Then do they suffer grievances by evil spirits, even until they are again expiated by due purgations. and man's returns to a divine nature. Therefore, an excellent magician can prohibit many mischiefs about to fall on him from the disposition of the stars, when he foreknows their nature by preventing, taking heed, and defending, lest they should meet him, and lest an ill-disposed subject, as we have said, should receive hurt, whence it ought to reap benefit. Chapter 40. That on every man a divine character is imprinted by the virtue of which man can attain the working of miracles. By no small experience, it is found that a certain power of ruling and predominating is implanted in man by nature. For Pliny testified that an elephant, meeting a man wandering in a desert, is reported to show himself gentle and courteous, and to show the way to him. And the same creature also is said, before he sees man, to tremble, to stand still, to look about, to quake at the steps of man for fear of treachery. In like manner the tiger, the most fierce of all beasts, at the sight of man doth remove her young ones, and more of this kind we read in divers authors, who have writ great volumes of creatures. But from whence do these animals know that man is to be feared, whom they never saw, and if they have seen and known, whence do they fear him, seeing they do excel him in greatness, force, and swiftness? What is this nature of man, striking this terror on wild beasts? All the historiographers of animals do find out and grant this, but have left to others to teach and prove it. Concerning this, therefore, Apollonius Tyaneus, as we read in Philostratus, seeing a child leading a huge elephant, answered Damis, asking him, whence came that obedience of so huge a creature to the little child? That it was from a certain act of terror implanted in man by his Creator, which inferior creatures and all animals perceiving do fear and reverence man, which is as it were a terrifying character, and a seal of God imprinted on man, by the which everything is subject to him, and acknowledges him superior, whether it be servant or animal. For otherwise neither could a child rule his herd and elephants, neither could a king terrify his people, nor the judge the guilty. Therefore, this character is imprinted on man from the divine idea, which the Kabbalists of the Hebrew called pahad, and the left hand, or sword of God. Furthermore, man hath not only a seal by which he is feared, but also by the which he is beloved, the idea of which is the divine numerations is called Hesed, which signifies clemency, and the right hand and scepter of God. From these divine numerations, by the intelligences and stars, seals, and characters, are imprinted on us to everyone according to his capacity and purity, which signs the first man created, without doubt did possess in all integrity and fullness, when all creatures, being attracted by secret gentleness, and subjected by terror, came to him as to their Lord, that he might give them names. But after the sin of prevarication, he fell from that dignity, with all his posterity. Yet that character is not altogether extinct in us. But by how much everyone is laden with sin, by so much he is farther off from these divine characters, and receives less of them, and whence he ought to receive friendship and reverence, he falls into the slavery and terror of others, both of animals and also men and devils, which Cain perceiving feared, saying to God, everyone who finds me will kill me. For he feared beasts and devils, not only men, who were very few, but in the old times many men who lived innocently, a very good life, as yet did enjoy that obedience and power, as Samson, David and Daniel over the lions, Elisha over the bear, Paul over the viper, and many anchorites lived in the deserts, in caves and dens of wild beasts, not fearing nor receiving any hurt, for as by sin that divine character is obscured, so sin being purged and expiated, it again more and more shines forth. Chapter 41. What concerning man after death, diverse opinions. In general, it is appointed for all men once to die. Death is fatal to all, but one is natural, another violent, another voluntarily received, another inflicted by human laws for offenses, or by God for sin, that they seem not to have rendered a due to nature, but a punishment for sins, which, as the Hebrew masters said, God remits to none. Whence the assembly delivered to Ezekiah, that after the house of the sanctuary was pulled down, although there remained not any order of judiciary execution, yet there should be a fourfold kind of punishment, by the which they might be condemned, that no man guilty of death should escape without retaliation. For he which had deserved to be stoned to death was, God dispensing, either cast down headlong from the house, or trodden in pieces by wild beasts, or overwhelmed by ruin or fall. But he which had deserved to be burned was either consumed by burnings, or finished he life either by venomous bitings, or stings of a serpent, or by poison. But he which should die by the sword was killed either by the violence of the jurisdiction, or by the tumult of the people or faction, or by the treachery of thieves. He that ought to be hanged was suffocated either in the waters, or extinguished by some other strangling punishment. And by the ground of this doctrine, that great Origen supposed the gospel of Christ to be declared. He who uses the sword shall perish by sword. Moreover, the ethnic philosophers pronounced that retaliation of this kind is adrastia, viz., an inevitable power of divine laws, by the which in courses to come is recompensed to everyone according to the reason and merits of his former life. So as he who unjustly ruled in the former life, and the other life should relapse into a servile state, he which hath polluted his hands with blood should be compelled to undergo retaliation. He that lived a brutish life should be precipitated and revolved into a brutish body. Of these things Plotinus writes in his book of the proper genius of everyone, saying, whosoever have kept human propriety to do again arise men, but whosoever have used sense only do return brute animals. Yet so, as those who use sense specially together with wrath do arise wild beasts, but whosoever use sense by concupiscence and pleasure do return lecherous and gluttonous beasts. But if they shall live, not by sense together with them, so much as by the degeneration of sense, plants grow up again with them, for the vitals only, or chiefly, are living, and all their care was that they might be turned into plants. But they which have lived being too much allured by music, not being depraved in other things, are born again musical animals. And they which have reigned without reason become eagles, unless they have been tainted with some wickedness. But he which hath lived civilly and virtuously returns a man. And Solomon himself in the Proverbs calls man sometimes a lion, tiger, bear, a boar, sometimes a hare, a hunting dog, a coney, sometimes a pismire, a hedgehog, a serpent, a spider, sometimes an eagle, a stork, a cock, or any other bird, and many such as these. But the Kabbalists of the Hebrews do not admit that souls are turned into brutes. Yet they do not deny, but that they have wholly lost their reason, shall in another life be left to a brutish affection and imagination. They assert also that souls are revolved hither thrice, and no more, because this number seems sufficiently to suffice for the purgation of sins, according to that of Job. He hath delivered my soul, that it should not proceed to death, but should live and see the light. Behold, all these things doth God work 3 times through each, that he might reduce their souls from corruption and illuminate them with the light of the living. But now let us see what the ancients' opinion is concerning the dead. When man dies, his body returns into the earth, from which it was taken. The spirits return to the heavens from whence it descended. As said the preacher, the holy body returns to the earth from whence it was, and the spirit returns to God that gave it, which Lucretius hath expressed in these verses. What came from earth to earth returns again. What came from God returns from whence it came. But Ovid expressed it better in these verses. 4 things of man there are: spirit, soul, ghost, flesh. These 4 four places keep and do possess. The earth covers flesh, the ghost hovers o'er the grave. Orcus hath the soul, stars do the spirit crave. The flesh being forsaken, and the body being defunct of life, is called a dead carcass, which, as say the divines of the Hebrews, is left in the power of the demon Zazel, of whom it is said in the scripture, Thou shalt eat dust all thy days, and elsewhere, the dust of the earth is his bread. Now man was created of the dust of the earth, whence also that demon is called the Lord of flesh and blood, whilst the body is not expiated and sanctified with due solemnities. Hence, not without cause, the ancients ordained expiations of carcasses, that which was unclean might be sprinkled with holy water, perfumed with incense, be conjured with sacred orations, have light set by, as long as it was above ground, and then at length be buried in a holy place. Hence Elpenor, in Homer, I beseech thee, said he, Ulysses, be mindful of me, and leave me not unburied, lest being unburied I become an object of the gods' wrath. But the spirit of man, which is of a sacred nature and divine offspring, because it is always faultless, becomes incapable of any punishment. But the soul, if it hath done well, rejoices together with the spirits, and going forth with its aerial chariot, passes freely to the choirs of the heroes, or reaches heaven, where it enjoys all its senses and powers, a perpetual blessed felicity, a perfect knowledge of all things, as also the divine vision, and possession of the kingdom of heaven, and being made partaker of the divine power, bestows freely diverse gifts upon these inferiors, as if it were an immortal god. But if it hath done ill, the spirit judges it, and leaves it to the pleasure of the devil, and the sad soul wanders about hell without a spirit, like an image, as Dido complains in Virgil. And now the great image of me shall go under the earth. Wherefore, when this soul, being void of an intelligible essence, and being left to the power of a furious fantasy, is ever subjected by the torment of corporeal qualities, knowing that it is, by the just judgment of God, forever deprived of the divine vision, to which it was created, for its sins, the absence of which divine vision, as the Scripture testifies, is the ground of all evils, and the most grievous punishment of all, which the Scripture calls the pouring down of the wrath of God. This image, therefore, of the soul enters into the ghost as an aerial body, with which, being covered, doth sometimes advise friends, sometimes stir up enemies, as Dido threatens Aeneas in Virgil, saying, I'll hunt thee, and thee tortures I will give. For when the soul is separated from the body, the perturbations of the memory and the sense remain. The Platonists say that the souls, especially of them that are slain, stir up enemies, man's indignation not so much doing of it, as the divine nemesis and demon foreseeing and permitting of it. So the spirit of Naboth, as the masters of the Hebrews interpret it, because in the end of its life it went forth with a desire of revenge, was made to execute revenge, the spirit of a lie, and went forth, God permitting it, a lying spirit in the mouth of all the prophets, until it made Ahab go unto Ramoth Gilead, and Virgil himself, together with the Pythagoreans and Platonists, to whom also our Augustine assents, confesses that separated souls retain the fresh memory of those things which they did in this life, and their will, whence he sings, what care they living had of horses brave, and arms of the same doth follow them to the grave. And Agazel, in his book De Scientia Divina, and other Arabians and Muslims, which were philosophers, think that the operations of the soul, being common to the conjoined body, impress upon the soul a character of use and exercise, which it being separated will use, being strongly impressed to the like operations and passions, which were not destroyed in lifetime. And although the body and organ be corrupted, yet the operation will not cease, but like affections and dispositions will remain, and these souls the ancients call with a common name, manes, whereof those that were in this life innocent and purified by moral virtues were very happy, and of them, as Virgil sings, that did for their country die, with priests who in their lives vowed chastity, and sacred poets who pleased Phoebus best, or by invented arts man's life assist, and others in their memories renowned. Although they departed this life without the justification of faith and grace, as many divines think, yet their souls were carried without any suffering into happy, pleasant fields. And as said Virgil, they went to places, and to pleasant greens, and pleasant seats, the pleasant groves between. where they enjoy certain wonderful pleasures, as also sensitive, intellectual, and revealed knowledge. Also, perhaps, they may be indoctrinated concerning faith and justification, as those spirits long since to whom Christ preached the gospel in prison. For as it is certain that none can be saved without the faith of Christ, so it is probable that this faith is preached to many pagans and Saracens after this life in those receptacles of souls unto salvation, and that they are kept in those receptacles as in common prison, until the time comes when the great judge shall examine our actions, to which opinion Lactantius, Irenaeus, Clemens, Tertullian, Augustine, Ambrose, and many more Christian writers do assent. But those souls which are impure, incontinent, depart wicked, do not enjoy such happy dreams, but wander full of most hideous phantasms, and in worse places, enjoying no free knowledge, but that is obtained by concession or manifestation, and with a continual fleshy desire, are subjected by reason of their corporeal corruption to the sense of pain, and fear swords and knives. These, without doubt, Homer seemed to be sensible of, when in the 11th book of the Odyssey he brings in the mother of Ulysses, being dead, standing near to him offering sacrifice, but neither knowing him or speaking to him, whilst he, with his sword drawn, did keep off ghosts from the blood of the sacrifice. But after that, Tiresias, the prophetess, advising of her, she had tasted of the sacrifice, and had drunk the blood. She presently knew her son, and crying spoke to him. But the soul of Tiresias, the prophetess, notwithstanding the drawn sword, even before she tasted the blood, knew Ulysses, and spoke to him, and showed him the ghost of his mother, standing near to him. Whatsoever vices, therefore, souls have committed in the bodies, unexpiated in this life, they are constrained, carrying the habits of them along with them, to purge themselves of them in hell, and to undergo punishment for them, which the poet explains in these verses. When they die, then doth not leave them all their misery. They having not repented of their crimes, must now be punished for their misspent times. For as the manners and habits of men are in this life, such affections for the most part follow the soul after death, which then calls to mind those things which it did formerly do in its life, and then intently thinks on them. For as much as then the diverse offices of life cease, as those of nourishing, growing, generating, and various occupations of senses and human affairs and comforts and obstacles of a grosser body, then are represented to the fantastic reason those species, which are so much the more turbulent and furious, by how much in such souls there lies hid an intellectual spark more or less covered, or altogether extinct, into which are then by evil spirits conveyed species either most false or terrible, whence now it is tormented in the concupiscible faculty by the concupiscence of an imaginary good, or of those things which it did formerly affect in its lifetime, being deprived of the power of enjoying them, although it may seem to itself sometimes almost to obtain its delights, but to be driven from them by the evil spirits into bitter torments, as is the poet's, Tantalus from the banquet, Sardanapalus from embraces, Midas from gold, Sisyphus from power, and they called these souls hobgoblins, whereof, if any taking care of household affairs, lives and inhabits quietly in the house, it is called a household god or familiar. But they are most cruelly tortured in their irascible faculty with the hatred of an imaginary evil, into the perturbations whereof, as also false suspicions and most horrible phantasms, they then fall, and they are represented to them sad representations, sometimes of the heaven falling upon their head, sometimes of being consumed by the violence of flames, sometimes of being drowned in a gulf, sometimes of being swallowed up into the earth, sometimes of being changed into diverse kinds of beasts, sometimes of being torn and devoured by ugly monsters, sometimes of being carried abroad through woods, seas, fire, air, and through fearful infernal places, and sometimes of being taken and tormented by devils. all which we conceive happens to them after death, no otherwise than in this life to those who are taken with a frenzy and some other melancholy distemper, or to those who are affrighted with horrible things seen in dreams and are thereby tormented, as if those things did really happen to them, which truly are not real, but only species of them apprehended in imagination. Even so do horrible representations of sins terrify those souls after death, as if they were in a dream, and the guilt of wickedness drives them headlong through diverse places, which therefore Orpheus calls the people of dreams, saying the gates of Pluto cannot be unlocked. Within is a people of dreams. Such wicked souls, therefore, enjoying no good places, when wandering in an aerial body, they represent any form to our sight, are called hags and goblins, inoffensive to them that are good, but hurtful to the wicked, appearing one while in thinner bodies, another time in grosser, in the shape of diverse animals and monsters, whose conditions they had in their lifetime, as sings the poet. Then diverse forms and shapes of brutes appear, for he becomes a tiger, swine, and bear, a scaly dragon, and a lioness, or doth from fire a dreadful noise express. He doth transmute himself to diverse looks, to fire, wild beasts, and into running brooks. For the impure soul of a man, who in this life contracted too great a habit to its body, doth by a certain inward affection of the elemental body frame another body to itself of the vapors of the elements, refreshing as it were from an ease manner, as it were with a suck. The body which is continually vanishing, to which being moreover enslaved, as to a prison, and sensible instrument by a certain divine law, doth in it suffer cold and heat, and whatsoever annoys the body, spirit, and sense, as it stinks, howlings, wailings, gnashing of the teeth, stripes, tearings, and bonds, as Virgil sang. And therefore for their crimes they must be punished, and for misspent times must tortures feel. Some in the winds are hung, others to cleanse their spotted sins are flung into vast gulfs or purged in fire. And in Homer, in his Necromancy Alcinous, makes this relation to Ulysses. Of Tychus, the dear darling of the earth, we saw the body stretched 9 furlongs forth, and on each side of whom a vulture great, gnawing his bowel. These souls sometimes do inhabit not these kinds of bodies only, but by a too great affection of flesh and blood transmute themselves into other animals, and seize upon the bodies of creeping things and brutes, entering into them, what kind soever they be, of possessing them like demons. Pythagoras is of the same opinion, and before him Trismegistus, asserting that wicked souls do oftentimes go into creeping things, and into brutes, neither do they, as essential forms, vivify and inform those bodies, but as an inmate, dwell there as in a prison, or stand near them by a local indistence, as an internal mover to the thing moved, or being tied to them are tormented, as Ixion to the wheel of serpents, Sisyphus to a stone. Neither do they enter into brutes only, but sometimes into men, as we have spoken concerning the soul of Nebaioth, which went forth a lying spirit in the mouth of the prophets. Hence some have asserted that the lives or spirits of wicked men, going into the bodies of some men, have disturbed them, and sometimes slew them, which is more fortunately granted unto blessed souls, that like good angels they should dwell in us, and enlighten us, as we read in Elias, that he being taken from men, his spirit fell upon Elisha. And elsewhere we read that God took the spirit which was in Moses, and gave it to 70 men. Here lies a great secret, and not rashly to be revealed. Sometimes also, which yet is very rare, souls are driven with such a madness that they do enter the bodies, not only of the living, but also by a certain hellish power, wander into dead carcasses, and being, as it were, revived commit horrid wickednesses, as we read in Saxo Grammaticus, that Suetus and Asmundus, 2 certain men vowed one to the other, that he that should live longest should be buried with him that was first dead. At length, Suetus, being first dead, is buried in a great vault with his dog and horse. with whom also Asmundus, by reason of his oath of friendship, suffered himself to be buried alive, meat which he should for a long time eat, being brought to him. In process of time, Ericus, king of Suecia, passing by the place with an army, breaking up the tomb of Asuitus, supposing that there was treasure, the vault being opened, brought forth Asmundus, whom, when he saw having a hideous look, being smeared over with filthy corrupt blood, which flowed from green wounds, from Asuitus being revived, and the knights took off with often struggling his right ear, he commanded him to tell him the cause of that wound, which he declares in these verses. Why doth my visage wan you thus amaze? Since he that lives amongst the dead the grace of beauty needs must lose. I know not yet what daring Stygian fiend of Asuit, the spirit sent from hell, who there did eat a horse and dog, and being with this meat not as yet sufficed, then set his claws on me, pulled off my cheek, mine ear, and hence you see my ugly, wounded, mangled, bloody face. This monstrous wight returned not to his place, without received revenge. I presently his head cut off, and with a stake did I his body thorough run. Pausanias tells a story not unlike to this, taken out of the interpreters of the Delphi, viz., that there was a certain infernal demon, which they called Eurynomus, who would eat the flesh of dead men and devour it, so that the bones would scarce be left. We read also in the chronicles of the Cretensians that the ghosts, which they call Catachenoe, were wont to return back into their bodies, and go to their wives and lie with them, for the avoiding of which, and that they might annoy their wives no more, it was provided in the common laws that the heart of them that did arise should be thrust through with a nail, and their whole carcass be burnt. These without doubt are wonderful things, and scarce credible, but that those laws and ancient histories make them credible. Neither is it altogether strange in Christian religion that many souls were restored to their bodies before the universal resurrection. Moreover, we believe that many, by the singular favor of God, are together with their bodies received to glory, and that many went down alive to hell. And we have heard that oftentimes the bodies of the dead were by the devils taken from the graves, without doubt, for no other use than to be imprisoned and tormented in their hands. And to these prisons and bonds of their bodies there are added also the possessions of most filthy and abominable places, where are Aetnian fires, gulfs of water, the shakings of thunder and lightning, gapings of the earth, and where the region is void of light, and receives not the rays of the sun, and knows not the light of the stars, but is always dark, whither Ulysses is reported in Homer to come, when he sings. Here people are that be Cimmerian named, drowned in perpetual darkness, it is famed, whom rising nor the setting sun doth see, but with perpetual night oppressed be. Neither are those mere fables, which many have recorded of the cave of Patricius, of the den of Vulcan, of the Aetnian caves, and of the den of Nursia, many that have seen and known them testifying the same. Also Saxo Grammaticus tells of greater things than these of the palace of Geruthus, and of the cave of Eugartholocus. Also Pliny, Solinus, Pythius, Clearchus, of the wonderful prodigies of the northern sea, of which Tacitus, also in his history of Drusus, shows that in the German sea there wandered soldiers, by whom diverse miraculous unheard of things were seen. These the force of whirlpools, unheard of kinds of birds, sea monsters, like men and beasts, and in his book of Germany he tells that the Haldusians and Axians, who had the face of men, but their other parts were equal to beasts, did dwell there, which without all doubt were the works of ghosts and devils. Of these also Claudinius long time since sang. In the extreme bounds of France there is a place, encompassed by the sea, where in his race, fame said Ulysses, having tasted blood, a secret people did descry, where loud and mournful plaints were heard of wandering spirits, which did the country people much affright. Aristotle relates of the Aeolian islands near Italy, that in Lipara was a certain tomb to which no man could go safe by night, and that there were cymbals and shrill voices, with certain absurd loud laughter, also tumults and empty sounds made, as the inhabitants did strongly aver, and that upon a time a certain young man, being drunk, went thither, and about night fell asleep near the cave of the tomb, and was after the third day found by them that sought him, and was taken up for dead, who being brought forth, the solemnities of the funeral being ready, suddenly rose up and told in order, to the great admiration of all, many things which he had seen and suffered. There is also in Norway a certain mountain most dreadful to all, surrounded by the sea, which commonly is called Hethelbergius, representing hell, whence there are heard great bewailings, howlings, and screechings a mile round about, and over which great vultures and most black crows fly, making most horrible noises, which forbid any to come near it. Moreover, from hence flow two fountains, whereof the one is most intense cold, the other most intense hot, far exceeding all other elements. There is also in the same country, toward the southern corner thereof, a promontory called Nederigan, where the demons of the place are seen by all in an aerial body. There is also in Scotland the mountain Dolorosus, from whence we are heard dreadful lamentations, and in Thuringia there is a mountain called Horosinus, where dwelt Sylvani and satyrs, as fame and experience teaches, and faithful writers testify. There are in divers countries and provinces such like miracles as these. I will not relate here those things which I have seen with mine eyes and felt with mine hands, lest by the wonderful admirableness and strangeness of them I should by the incredulous be accounted a liar. Neither do I think it fit to pass by what many of our age think concerning the receptacles of souls, not much differing from these which we have now spoken of which Tertullian, in his 4th book against the heresies of Marcion, said, "It is apparent to every wise man, which hath ever heard of the Elysian fields, that there is some local determination, which is called Abraham's bosom, for the receiving of the souls of his sons, and that that region is not celestial, yet higher than hell, where the souls of the just rest, until the consummation of things restore the resurrection of all things with fullness or reward." Also Peter the apostle said to Clemens, a king of him, of these things, "Thou dost constrain me, O Clemens, to publish something concerning these unutterable. Yet as far as I may, I will. Christ, who from the beginning and always was always through each generation, though secretly present with the godly, with those especially by whom he was desired, and to whom he did most often appear. But it was not time that the bodies then being resolved, there should be a resurrection. But this rather seemed a remuneration from God, that he that was found just should remain longer in a body, or that the Lord should translate him, as we see clearly related in the Scripture of some certain just men. After the like example God dealt with others, who pleased him well, and fulfilling his will were being translated to paradise reserved for a kingdom. But of those who could not fulfill the rule of justice, but had some relic of wickedness in their flesh, the bodies indeed are resolved, but souls are kept in good and pleasant regions, that in the resurrection of the dead, when they shall receive their bodies, being now purged by resolution, they may enjoy an eternal inheritance for those things which they have done well. Irenaeus, also in the end of his book, which he wrote against the heresies of the Valentinians, said, "Whereas the Lord went in the middle of the shadow of death, where the souls of the dead were, and after rose again corporeally, and after resurrection was taken up, it is manifest that the souls of the disciples, for whom he worked these things, should go to some invisible place, appointed by God, and there tarry until the resurrection, afterwards receiving their bodies, and rising again perfectly, i.e. corporeally, as the Lord arose. So shall they come into the presence of God, for no disciple is above his master, but everyone shall be perfect as his master. Therefore, even as our master did not presently fly and go away, but expected the time of his resurrection determined by the Father, which is also manifested by Jonas. After 3 days arising, he is taken up. so also ought we to expect the time of our resurrection determined by God, foretold by the prophets, and so rising again we shall be taken up, as many as the Lord shall account worthy of this honor. Lactantius Firmianus also agrees to this, in that book of divine institutions, whose title is A Divine Reward, saying, "Let no man think that the souls after death are presently judged, for they are all detained in one common custody, until the time comes in which the great judge shall examine deserts. Then they whose righteousness shall be approved shall receive the reward of immortality. But they whose sins and wickedness are detected shall not rise again, but being destined for certain punishment, shall be shut up with the wicked angels into the same darkness. Of the same opinions are Augustine and Ambrose, who says in his Enchiridion, the time which is interposed between the death of man and the last resurrection contains the soul in secret receptacles, as everyone is worthy of rest or sorrow, according to that which it obtained whilst it lived in the flesh. But Ambrose, in his book concerning the benefits of death, said, the writing of Esdras calls the habitations of the souls storehouses, which be meeting with the complaints of man, because that the just who have gone before may seem, even to the day of judgment, viz., for a long time, to be wonderfully defrauded of their just recompense of reward, doth liken the day of judgment to a garland, for the day of reward is expected of all, that in the meantime both the conquered may be ashamed, and the conquerors may attain the palm of victory. Therefore, while the fullness of time is expected, the souls expect their due recompense, punishment remaining for some, glory for others. And in the same place he calls hell a place which is not seen, which the souls go to, being separated from the bodies. And in his second book of Cain and Abel, he said, the soul is loosed from the body, and after the end of this life is even as yet in suspense, being doubtful of the judgment to come. To these assenteth that evangelical saying concerning the last judgment. Christ saying in Matthew, many shall say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name, and in thy name cast out devils? And then I shall confess to them that I never knew them. By which speech it seems to be clear that even until this day they were uncertain concerning their sentence, and by the confidence of miracles which they had performed in the name of Jesus, whilst they lived, to have been in some hope of salvation. Therefore, because the judgment of souls is deferred until the last day, many theologians think that satisfactory intercessions may help not only the justified, but also the damned, before the appointed day of judgment. So Trajan, the emperor, was delivered from hell by St. Gregory, and justified to salvation, though some think that he was not freed from the guilt of punishment, but the justice of punishment was prolonged until the day of judgment. But Thomas Aquinas said, it seems more probable that by the intercessions of St. Gregory, Trajan lived again, and obtained a gracious power, by the which he was freed from the punishment and guilt of sin. There are some theologians who think that the dirges for the dead, neither the punishment nor the guilt is taken away or detracted, but only some ease and assuagement of the pains is procured, and this by the similitude of the sweating porter, who by the sprinkling of some water seems to be eased of the weight of his burden, or helped to carry it more easily. Although nothing of the burden be taken off, yet the common opinion of theologians denies that prayers or funeral dirges do cause any favor for the guilty within the gates of Pluto. But seeing all these things are of an incomprehensible obscurity, many have vainly whet their wits on them. Therefore, we holding to the opinion of Augustine, as he said in the 10th book of Genesis, do affirm that it is better to doubt concerning occult things than to contend about uncertain things. For I doubt not but that rich man is to be understood in the flames of pains, and that poor man in the refreshment of joys. But how that flame of hell, that bosom of Abraham, that tongue of the rich man, that torment of thirst, that drop of cooling are to be understood, it is hardly found out by the modest searcher, but by the contentious never. But these things, being for this present omitted, we hasten to further matters, and will dispute concerning the restitution of souls. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Midwest Covencast Presents Weekend Reads. Join us next time as we continue through Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy or magic, Book 3, Ceremonial Magic. To access podcast extras and so much more, you can visit MidwestCovencast.com. Otherwise, I hope you will visit us on social media at Midwest Covencast on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram, and at Midwest Coven on Twitter. Until next time, Coven, blessed be.